of interspecies altruism. Now this is a point, that Uncle Aldo is going to make. And it's not exactly, this is not a very well received point, but it's an important point. We who erect this monument are performing a dangerous act because our sorrow is genuine. Oh, the poor passenger pigeon. We wouldn't have done that if that was us, right? We love our birds. We are tempted to believe that we had no part in the demise of the pigeon. The truth is that our grandfathers who did the actual killing were our agents. They were our agents in the sense that they shared the conviction which we have only now begun to doubt, that it is more important to multiply people and comforts than to cherish the beauty of the land in which they live. Okay, that's the doubt. We begin to doubt that, right? We assume that. Pinchot assumed that, right? It is more important to multiply people and comforts than to cherish the beauty of the land in which they live, right? Building the Dalles Dam multiplies people and comforts ostensibly, although the city of the Dalles is roughly the same size it was when the Dalles Dam was first constructed, so there goes that argument. But anyway, it is more important to multiply people, comforts, right? We get a lot of comforts supposedly. That's a big power generating thing, right? A lot of kilowatts are harvested from the river by that giant dam that flooded and temporarily destroyed Celilo Falls, right? We could have cherished the beauty, and we did. It was a beloved place, the most popular tourist destination in the Pacific Northwest until the day it was flooded. So we did cherish the beauty of the land in which we lived, but we thought it was more important to multiply people. And now we doubt that, right? Now we doubt whether that's true. And what we are doing here today, Uncle Aldo says, is publicly to confess a doubt whether this is true, right? Maybe Pinchot was wrong. This then is a monument to a bird we have lost and to a doubt we have gained. Perched like a duck hawk on this cliff, it will scan this wide valley, watching through the days and years. For many a march, it will watch the geese go by, telling the river about clearer, colder, lonelier waters on the tundra. For many an April, it will see the red buds come and go, and for many a May, the flush of oak blooms on 1,000 hills. Questing wood ducks will search these bass woods for hollow limbs. Golden prothonotarians will shake the golden pollen from the river willows. Are those butterflies? I don't know. What's a prothonotary? A warbler? Oh, thank you. What's your name? Steve. Steve? Oh, thank you, Steve. Oh, Steve Young. Right on. A warbler. All right. Golden prothonotarians. Egrets will pose on these sloughs in August. Plovers will whistle from September skies. Hickory nuts will plop into October leaves, and hail will rattle in November woods. But no pigeons will pass, for there are no pigeons, save only this flightless one, graven in bronze on this rock. Tourists will read this inscription, but their thoughts, like the bronze pigeon, will have no wings. We are told by economic moralists, like Uncle Gifford, that to mourn the pigeon is mere nostalgia, that if the pigeoners had not done away with him, the farmers would ultimately have been obliged in self-defense to do so. Right? The populations crashed mainly because they were shot in giant numbers, right? And a flock of 1 billion birds, you might shoot a lot, a couple 100 million out of them. And also their habitat was destroyed. But if that hadn't got them, in the end, the farmers would have had to get them, because think of these giant, huge flocks of birds that just... And evidently, right, the land was so rich, there was so much fat of the land in North America, that they didn't even have a predestined flight path like some birds do when they migrate, right? I mean, I'm sure they went south when the weather got too cold up north, right? So they'd go south and north seasonally. But in terms of where they go next, they just get up and go, because there's so much food, and then they fly really high, and then they see something. And and down they go, right? And that's just the most amazing sight, right? That's they fly through the sky, all rainbow, like rainbow colors, right? Because they have all these beautiful glistening feathers. A bird of transcendent beauty. And then they decide, and who knows how they decide. Maybe they have some leaders or some people that they respect, some birds that they respect, and all of a sudden the whole flock just dives down. And just to be able to see that, right? I read somewhere, just some people would give up everything, right? Every creature comfort just to see that one time. I would. Just see the Columbia Gorge, just for one day, running free, flowing free. white water everywhere, just one day. I'd give up all this. Wouldn't you? Anyway, the pigeon, okay, we are told by economic moralists that to mourn the pigeon is mere nostalgia, that if the pigeoners had not done away with him, the farmers would ultimately have been obliged in self-defense to do so. Perhaps this is true, but perhaps it is also true that we did away with an idea as well as a bird. It is one of the ironies of science that it discovers ex post facto a philosophical significance in what was previously tossed into the dustbin. And this is the idea that we tossed into the dustbin. The pigeon was no mere bird. He was a biological storm. He was the lightning that played between two biotic poles of intolerable intensity, the fat of the land and his own zest for living. Yearly, the feathered tempest roared up, down, and across the continent, sucking up the laden fruits of forest and prairie, burning them in a traveling blast of life. Like any other chain reaction, the pigeon could survive no diminution of his own furious intensity. Once the pigeoners had subtracted from his numbers, and once the settlers had chopped gaps in the continuity of his fuel, his flame guttered out with hardly a sputter or even a wisp of smoke. Today, the laden oaks still flaunt their burden at the sky, but the feathered lightning is no more. Worm and weevil must now perform slowly and silently the biological task which once drew thunder from the firmament. The wonder is not that the pigeon passed, but that he ever survived through all the millennia of pre-modern time. The pigeon lived by his desire for clustered grape and bursting beechnut, and by his contempt of miles and seasons. Things that Wisconsin did not offer him today, he sought and found tomorrow in Michigan or Labrador or Tennessee. To find them required only the free sky and the will to ply his wings. But there are fruits in this land, unknown to pigeons and as yet to most men. Perhaps we too can live by our desires to find them, and by a contempt for miles and seasons, a love of free sky, and a will to ply our wings. All right. Actually, the other essay by, they recently rededicated it. Let's see. Yeah. There's some amazing facts about these birds. This guy in 2014, okay? And that was the 100th anniversary of the death of Martha, the extinction, the final extinction of this species. 200 years ago, there were 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons wandering the eastern half of North America. 143 years ago, in 1871, central Wisconsin hosted the largest nesting of pigeons ever recorded, covering a core area of 850 square miles and numbering in the hundreds of millions of birds. Tens of millions of them were killed. Just 28 years later, right? In 1899, the last pigeon in Wisconsin was shot. 112 years ago, in 1902, the last pigeon in the wild was shot in Indiana. 100 years ago, Martha died. The species went extinct. And then 67 years ago, the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology erected this monument. So, anyway, and then he goes over Leopold's speech. Pretty amazing. All right, let's see. I didn't anticipate taking all this time on the passenger pigeons, but that's all right. Okay. So today is our day to study animal welfare ethics, and also to focus in on a deontological defense of animal welfare ethics. All right, but just acknowledge at the outset that there are other. Peter Singer's is probably the most popular and most widely read defense of animal welfare ethics. He's probably sold a lot more books than Tom Regan. But Tom Regan and Peter Singer are both considered very influential. Tom Regan, of course, comes from a Kantian perspective. Singer tries to come from a utilitarian perspective. But the goal, it makes sense that utilitarians would take a stance on animal welfare, because animals can feel pain and pleasure. And because they can feel pain and pleasure, a utilitarian might easily be encouraged to adopt a non-individualistic, an individualistic more than anthropocentric perspective. There are also virtue ethics defenses of animal welfare. And then I mentioned previously today that St. Francis probably should be read as giving us a natural law defense. Right? Every single individual being is authored by God, right? Designed, authored, put into being by God. And just that mere fact in itself means that that individual being is illuminated with moral status, right, for St. Francis. Even worms, maybe even trees and plants, maybe even ecological wholes. He does talk about, what a brother, sun, and sister moon, right? So, what are they? The moon especially. I mean, I can see the sun because the sun is the source, of all the heat that we need. It's the engine that fuels all this life, so it obviously deserves a great deal of moral status. But the moon? Come on. But they're all God's children, right? And that in itself makes them have moral status, arguably. All right. Okay, and ultimately it means, what does that mean to have moral status? In a term that we'll use more in a couple weeks here, it might just mean practical respect, right? We have obligations to treat all of these beings with practical respect. That doesn't always mean that we have to save their lives, right? Sometimes it means we take their lives, but we can take their lives with practical respect, right? Or we can just willy-nilly slaughter them. All right, so really we could consider biocentrism as a form of animal welfare ethics, but it goes a lot deeper, obviously. It's, living thing ethics, not living thing welfare ethics, right? Not just animal welfare ethics. But so if you want to reconstruct different kinds of animal welfare ethics, then those are the 5 that you have out there that are available to you. All right. Oh, I don't know. I found this quote, and it, I guess a lot of humans tend to associate moral status with consciousness, and so a lot of biologists have concluded that consciousness is not at all something uniquely human. Consciousness manifests in all kinds of different species. And not even the absence of a neocortex precludes an organism from experiencing affective states. Like an octopus is a good example of that. They don't have a neocortex, right? They're not even a mammal. What are they, mollusk? Or I'm not sure what they are, but taxonomists can tell me. But anyway, but they're highly intelligent, evidently. They recognize people, they distinguish, they have taste between different people. They squirt ink at people they don't like and stuff like that. So perhaps we need to rethink the idea that only humans have enough consciousness to have moral status. Convergent evidence indicates that non-human animals have the neuroanatomical, neurochemical, and neurophysiological substrates of conscious states, along with the capacity to exhibit intentional behaviors. Consequently, the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Intentional behaviors. It seems to be very important, doesn't it? An animal that exhibits intentional behaviors has more moral status. Right? The claim is made. Not necessarily by me, but non-human animals, including all mammals and birds and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. So I, sat down a couple years ago or last year and tried to figure out how many different moral classifications would I suggest, and I came up with 5, and each of them is a little bit porous, though. They're not hard and fast. For example, if we come to learn through enhanced communication with dolphins, for example, that they do make, accept, and keep promises, then perhaps we need to bump dolphins into class 5 here, right? And consider them fully rational and autonomous like us, and therefore with the full suite of rights that we are endowed with, right? But perhaps they belong more appropriately up here. Perhaps elephants are unusual in terms of self-recognition. There's this spot test, I think they call it, that biologists will perform on different kinds of animals. And most animals will not even notice, right? A mirror gets put in their cage or in their aquarium, and while they're sleeping or while they're tranquilized, somebody just paints a big black mark on their face, right? And most animals don't pay attention to the mirror, don't even know that that's their body in the mirror, right? But some animals, and dolphins are one example of that. Dolphins will look at themselves and try to figure out what that is, and they'll try to rub it off, right? And so will dolphins, obviously. So there's a certain level of self-awareness that's exhibited in an elephant that arguably is not exhibited to such a great extent in a dog, all right? So maybe dogs, most mammals probably belong up here along with most birds. Although there's a great deal of variety in the intelligence level of birds. You know, if you look at a starling or a robin or something, right, look in the bird's eye, there's not very much home there, right? There's not very much of a, but whereas a crow, right, crows will watch you and they check things out, right, and they learn, and then parrots, right? Corvids and parrots, I guess, and maybe a couple other families of birds are remarkably more intelligent. They say that crows and ravens have the intelligence of a dog, roughly. They're just about as smart as a dog. In some ways, they're smarter. They're very good problem solvers. Anyway, so there are all these exceptions, right? Maybe crows belong up here, and ravens, right? That's why I put that here. So, anyway, but the idea is that, you know, from class 1 and class 2, a guy like Regan is going to say that we can instrumentalize those guys. We have no moral concerns about animals in class 1 or class 2. It's only when we get to class 3 where we start to encounter animals who are subjects of lives, right? And then they have rights, right? For Regan. For Singer now, probably Singer would include, Singer the utilitarian would have to include class 2 also, because they are minimally sentient. Presumably, although there's some research that indicates some of these, like, who knows, man? I don't accept fish. Fish feel pain. You know, there's some research that says they don't feel pain. I don't know. I don't follow that stuff very much, so don't ask. You know, don't. But it seems as though Singer, because his criterion for moral status, for being morally considerable, is the capacity to feel pleasure and pain. It seems as though Singer's theory is going to be more inclusive of other types, whereas Regan is just focused on mammals and birds and everything above them. Right, well, that's it. I mean, we're mammals too, right? What else would we be? We're not plants, obviously. All right. So, by the time we're done with the term, we will end up we will have examined 4 different deontological statements of our duties to human and non-human entities. The classical humanist Immanuel Kant, of course, restricted moral status to human beings because moral status depends on rationality and autonomy. Tom Regan is the guy that we read for today, and he insists that if an animal is the subject of a life, then that animal has moral status. All right? All right. And then Albert Schweitzer, we know, said, you gave us what I've taught you to identify, perhaps not entirely accurately, but good enough for us for an introductory level course. I've taught you to identify Albert Schweitzer's argument as also a neo-Kantian deontological argument, and he argues for the moral status of all living things, of course. And then Rolston comes along, who we'll read on Thursday, and he argues for the moral status of ecosystems and for the earth as a whole. Right? And all of them use a form of argument that I identify as deontological because essentially it amounts to a defense of certain types of beings through first articulating certain properties, identifying those properties in a being, like an ecosystem, right? It might be, you might wonder, well, what is the property of an ecosystem that would give it moral status, right? Such that treating that ecosystem solely as a means to a human end is morally wrong, okay? Remember that, you know, so Rolston is the guy that kind of stretches out this neo-Kantian moment in Leopold. Right? Remember we went over that last week? There's this neo-Kantian moment in Leopold, and I know we'll take a break in about a minute, okay? Where Leopold can be interpreted as arguing that eroding, damaging, harming an ecosystem's capacity to renew itself, eroding, damaging, harming an ecosystem's integrity, stability, and beauty necessarily involves eroding and damaging the wholeness of the ecosystem, right? The wholeness of the ecosystem. And the ecosystem gets its whole identity through its wholeness, right? And so when you damage its wholeness, its integrity, its stability, perhaps even its beauty, then you are impermissibly reducing it to an instrument, right, of human ends. So anyway, that's where we're going for Thursday, but we've got a little bit more to go over, obviously, with Regan. So let's take our 5-minute break and then come back and get back into Regan. All right? Please do. Oh, yeah, and I have a bunch of stuff to hand back, too.
Oh, great.
Reminding me, I forgot. And I gotta get this attendance sheet going around. It's just ridiculous. I keep missing it.
Are those
I think Roy might be farting over there. Yes, I gave them back last week, but I have some that if you didn't pick it up yet, yes. And they're all actually together alphabetically here.
And then I emailed a reading response.
Yeah, what's your name?
Steven.
Yeah, I got those. That's all in here. I graded everything. I'm all caught up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So we'll just do A through H. And then A through N. S and T, I guess. Yeah, and there's your RC. Oh, I know I marked this.
by any chance, did you get my email from Thursday?
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't take attendance at all last week, so everyone was here. All right, there's Y through Z.
So is it going to count?
Yeah. Well, you were just here. I don't have any way of knowing whether you weren't here. So yeah, so you were just here.
I can't meet Thursday next week. I just want to make sure.
Really? All
I
right.
have a family.
You can always watch the lecture on YouTube.
And I just can't miss them. I don't see these like every 10 years. But I just wanted to make sure I was like, I really like hope and.
Well, I like to think that every student enjoys my class so much that they just so badly regret not showing up that they just show up.
Did you? I don't.
It's a safe place, you know. What better place could there be?
Right.
Oh, did I not?
Yeah.
All right. That means I gave you an F. No, it doesn't. Let's see. I should check on. Oh, you're right. Damn it, I didn't. You're right, man. Oh well. All right.
Did you want me to? Okay.
No, I'm sure it's fine.
Did you?
Same thing for me.
Yeah, I messed up. All
Thank
right,
you.
Sure. Same thing for you? You're Emily? No, you're
And
Rose.
I'm Rose.
Sorry, I wasn't looking up. I don't know why.
Thank
I
you.
remember now I got interrupted. Sure.
Funny, I was actually watching a documentary about ravens about a year ago. They're one of the only species, other than humans, bees, and ants, that can actually communicate displacement. So I guess they would communicate like a food source or something, but they can communicate like it. I don't know how, but it's specific
location
time,
of
the
it?
location, and its time and place.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting.
They also pass on knowledge to their offspring.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they tested that out because like they did this elaborate experiment where they sent a guy with a mask on, really scary, like Halloween mask, to steal the eggs, right? And
I think I've heard of this actually.
and then the parents got upset, you know, and learned to identify that man with the mask as being evil, and They didn't steal all the eggs though, anyway, and they monitored the offspring. There were three chicks hatched out, and evidently the parents taught the children to hate because the children themselves, the baby crows, never saw this man with the mask on. But 2 years later, they had radio collars on him, right, so they could find him. And 2 of them had died, I guess, but 1 was still alive. And so they sent the man with the mask on, and the crow sent out an alarm. So this is bad, scary. And he warned all his buddies, this guy's bad, man, stay away from him. And he had never been exposed to him. So the only explanation is that his parents had passed on.
To avoid that image, that mask. And that's interesting.
Yeah, sometimes I and other people who think, more favorably or more sympathetically or empathetically about non-human animals get accused of anthropomorphizing them, right? Well, we're just anthropomorphizing these animals when really, that's us doing. But I tend to think that we're a lot more like non-human animals than we acknowledge, and so and so maybe if we take a crow-centric perspective, then we'd find all these things that, hey, those humans are acting like us. You know what I mean?
No, I agree with that, and it is easy to anthropomorphize animals too. I mean, I think we tend to do this a lot with dogs, pets, kind of give them a personality, but I guess then in their own way they do have their own distinct personalities too. I mean, I don't know.
This doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were one that I missed. I gave you a 17. Sure. All right. So what is the argument anyway? Somebody tell me. What is the argument? Why does Roy have... What is the defense of Roy's rights? Is it just as strong as the defense of Kevin's rights? Remember Kevin with the miraculous genetic material? Right? That's going to save a bunch of us? We could put Kevin on the lifeboat too. But is that what we mean when we say Roy has a right to life and liberty? Do we mean the same thing? Is the claim that we're making as strong as we make about the claim that Kevin has a right to life and liberty? Kevin's rights to life and liberty can't be overridden by utilitarian concerns, can they? That was the point of the example. Does anyone think that, the fact that Kevin's genetic material can save 1,000 human beings justifies euthanizing Kevin and grinding him up and turning him into a medicine for these 1,000 people? Does anyone think that's justifiable? Well, why not? Doesn't social expediency, right? Doesn't the greater outcome, isn't that what we should look to? We're saving 1,000 lives, we're only sacrificing 1.
That is the utilitarian argument. Kant, the ontological argument, would say you're just using Kevin as an instant means rather than himself.
And that's just categorically wrong, right?
Yeah, and that's his argument.
What if Kevin's a chimpanzee and his genetic material? Well, the claim about rights that Tom Regan seems to be making is, right, the more stringent reading of Tom Regan's argument is that it's morally wrong to instrumentalize, even if Kevin was a chimp. If Kevin's genetic material could save 1,000 human beings, it would still be morally wrong to instrumentalize Kevin. Could he be arguing that? Should anyone argue that? How can that be? How can that be? So why? Well, I think what a lot of these deontologists kind of want to back up and start trying to explain what gives humans this special status. And then they want to make a further move and say that, well, we can't attribute the special moral status of humans to any one set of traits, right? We can't just say humans have moral status because they're intelligent, because we know, or because they're rational and autonomous. Well, we also want to claim that non-rational and comatose humans have rights, right? And so, in order to account for the metaphysical status, special metaphysical status of a human being, the argument goes, Regan says, we have to kind of cast our net low enough that that net ends up catching some non-human animals as well. Okay? And ultimately what Regan argues that what's ultimately valuable about the human being is that the human being is aware of itself as a being with interests and needs and goals and objectives and passions and desires and wants, right? We want to do certain things, long-term and short-term, right? We want to quench our thirst if we're thirsty. We want to go get some yummy food if we're hungry. We want to get warm if we're cold. And long-term, we want to get educations. We want to get fulfilling careers, right? And develop ourselves as people. And it's morally wrong to interfere with any of that because you are beings with goals, interests, ambitions, right? That's as low as we have to cast our moral status net in order to apprehend the moral status of a human being, right? And yet when we cast our net that low, we end up catching all kinds of other animals too, right? We end up having to acknowledge that, for example, Roy is a being with his own goals and ends and interests and needs and ambitions, right? And therefore, Roy has moral status, okay? But animals that are cognitively so primitive that they're not able to conceive of themselves as beings with goals and ends, right? Don't have moral status. That's what, so there's something, right? And it's an artful argument that we should be skeptical of, especially having already read Schweitzer. Right? Schweitzer is very radical compared to Regan, because Schweitzer wants to say that even a fly has moral status. But we want to, right? I mean, we keep referring, I invite all of you to keep thinking about a non-consequentialist defense. What does that mean? What does it mean to insist that we have duties of practical respect to non-human beings? Right? Because don't our duties, isn't this what all the Enlightenment thinkers teach us? Our duties to beings are dependent on those beings being rational, being free, being able to reciprocate, being able to recognize, for example, that when they rob the convenience store, they're renouncing their own rights, they're surrendering their own rights, right? Only humans can do all those things. So, so to defend, the notion that non-humans also have moral status is certainly not an easy thing to do. All right. Well, all right. So should we get more political maybe? Should we talk about specific instances that Regan's animal rights formula would prohibit us, right? I mean, eating meat. Tom Regan says that it's, I guess he could eat fish, couldn't he? But he can't eat any mammals and he can't eat any birds. He can't advocate hunting, not even ecosystem management hunting, really. Well, maybe he could do that if it's demonstrated to him that culling out a deer herd, for example, is going to result in